My name is Eleanor, and the past is not dead to me. It is a physical weight in my hands. My grandmother's passing left me not only her sprawling townhouse on Orleans Square in Savannah, Georgia, but also her lifelong obsession with collecting antiques. The house was a museum of silence, each piece holding its breath. Among the treasures was a single item she had specifically willed to me, a porcelain doll she called Annalise. It was unnerving, with its pale, crackled complexion and a fixed, knowing stare from eyes the color of a winter sky. I placed it in my study, a room of dark wood and towering bookshelves, thinking it a sentimental, if slightly macabre, keepsake. The first incident occurred a week before Halloween. I was cataloging a collection of 19th century letters, the only sound the scratching of my pen and the old house settling around me. A cold draft, sharp and localized, snaked through the room. Lifting the hairs on my arm, I looked up, and my blood froze. Annalise was no longer facing the window. Her head had turned, ever so slightly, and her glassy gaze was now fixed directly on me. My rational mind scrambled for an explanation. A tremor, a trick of the light. But the air was thick with the scent of gardenias, my grandmother's favorite perfume, a scent that had not been in this house for 30 years. The messages started the next night. I awoke to a faint scratching sound, like a twig on glass, coming from the study. Pushing the door open, I found the room ice cold. On my desk, a single sheet of my grandmother's personalized stationery lay. A sentence was scrawled upon it in a shaky, desperate hand. He watches from the garden. The ink was not ink at all, but a rusty brown, flaking substance I dared not identify. The doll sat primly in her chair, but her little black shoes were dusted with fresh, dark soil. My garden below was pristine, the soil in its raised beds untouched. Each night brought a new fragment, a new horror. The messages spoke of a man, a shadow in the oak alley, of a promise broken at the gazebo in Forsyth Park. They were pieces of a story I never knew, my grandmother's story from the autumn of 1993. I began to research, my investigations taking me to the city's archives and its oldest, most haunted spaces. I walked the paths of Colonial Park Cemetery, where the dates on the stones told stories of yellow fever and lost lives. Feeling a pervasive sense of being followed, of unseen eyes tracking my progress from behind the thick curtains of moss. Halloween night descended upon Savannah with a peculiar heaviness. A thick river fog rolled in, muffling the sounds of costumed revelers on River Street, turning their laughter into distant, ghostly echoes. In my study, the air was so cold I could see my breath. Annalise was no longer in her chair. She stood on the desk, her back to me, pointing a single, ceramic finger toward the window that overlooked my private walled garden. As I watched, a word formed in the condensation on the cold glass, not by my hand, LES. A power that was not my own compelled me to pick her up. The moment my fingers touched her cold porcelain, a vision slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. I was my grandmother, young and terrified, running through this very garden on a night 30 years past. The scent of gardenias was overpowering. A man emerged from the shadows beneath the great live oak, his face obscured by the brim of a hat, his hands outstretched. I felt a searing pain, a struggle, then the cold, unforgiving earth as I was forced down. The vision broke, and I was back in my study, gasping. The doll clutched to my chest. Her porcelain cheek was damp, as if from a tear. The final message did not come on paper. It was a whisper that seemed to originate from inside my own mind, a voice both familiar and alien, threaded with static and fear. He buried it with me, under the oak. The proof. I knew what I had to do. With a trembling hand, I took a shovel from the garden shed and walked to the base of the massive live oak, its branches a skeletal canopy against the orange glow of the city, lit fog. I dug, my heart hammering against my ribs. The soil was soft, disturbed long ago. Just a foot down, the metal tip of the shovel struck something hard. It was a tarnished silver locket, tarnished black in places. I pried it open with muddy fingers. Inside, on one side, was a tiny water-stained photograph of my grandmother smiling. On the other side was a man I recognized with a jolt of pure ice down my spine. It was Charles, my grandmother's longtime neighbor, and a kindly, elderly man who still brought me cookies and asked about my work. He was younger in the picture, but his eyes, cold and possessive, were the same. The locket was engraved with a date, October 31st, 1993, the night she died. As the grandfather clock in the hall struck midnight, signaling the end of Halloween, a new sound reached me. A soft, steady crunch of footsteps on the gravel path in the garden. I looked up from the locket, my blood turning to slush in my veins. A figure stood under the oak tree, a dark silhouette against the fog. It was tall, wearing a long coat and a wide-brimmed hat. It was not the benign neighbor I knew. This was the shadow from the messages, the shape from my vision. He had felt the truth being unearthed. He had come back to the garden. He was waiting. My name is Diego, and it all started in a place that felt utterly normal. A sprawling antique mall just off Interstate 70 in Wheeling, West Virginia. I was driving from Pittsburgh to Columbus for a consulting job and stopped to kill some time. The Ohio Valley Antique Mall is a cavernous space, a former warehouse filled with the ghostly remnants of other people's lives. I've always had a thing for old, solid things, objects with history. I found the mirror in a corner booth, tucked away near the back, where the fluorescent lights hummed and flickered inconsistently. It was a handsome piece, despite its flaws. A tall, heavy-standing mirror with a dark oak frame carved with patterns so worn they were almost smooth in places. The price tag was only $40. A steal, I thought. I brought it home to my rented townhouse in a quiet, tree-lined subdivision in Dublin, Ohio, a suburb of Columbus. The mirror was heavy, and it took effort to get it up the carpeted stairs to my bedroom. I positioned it opposite my bed, leaning against the wall. For weeks, it was just a mirror. I'd check my tie in it, or see the rumpled bedclothes reflected behind me. But as October deepened and the days grew shorter, I began to feel a subtle shift. The reflection in the mirror seemed slower. If I turned my head quickly, my reflection would lag by a fraction of a second, a ghostly afterimage trailing in the glass. I wrote it off as fatigue, the stress of my project. The first real incident happened on the night of October 29th. I woke up thirsty, the digital clock on my nightstand glowing 3:17 a.m. The room was dark, lit only by the faint green glow of the clock and the ambient light from a street lamp filtering through the blinds. As I sat up, I glanced at the mirror. My own dim form was there, sitting up in bed. But the bed reflected behind me wasn't my neat, navy, sheeted bed. It was a mess of tangled white sheets, and on the pillow was a distinct, person-shaped depression, as if someone had just been lying there. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. I squinted, and the image shifted, resolving back into my own normal, tidy bed. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a hypnopompic hallucination, the residue of a dream. But on Halloween, the mirror stopped pretending. I came home late from work, the neighborhood alive with the laughter of trick-or-treaters and the rustle of fallen leaves. I had turned off all the lights to avoid having to answer the door. The only illumination in my bedroom came from the pulsing, orange glow of a plastic jack-o'-lantern on a neighbor's porch, which cast rhythmic, shifting shadows across the walls. I was taking off my watch when I looked into the mirror. I wasn't there. The reflection showed my bedroom, but it was different. The walls were stained with long, vertical streaks of damp, and a fine network of cracks spread from the corners like spider webs. The air in the reflection seemed thick with dust. Then, a figure moved in the glass. It was me, but a hollowed-out version of me, dressed in the suit I'd worn to my father's funeral 2 years prior. This other me was kneeling on the floor, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I watched, paralyzed, as the reflection of my doppelganger looked up, his face a mask of utter despair, and stared not at me, but at a spot on the floor, just in front of the real me. I felt a cold spot bloom in the air there, a pocket of winter. This was my deepest regret, the thing I worked daily to forget, being too consumed by a business deal to answer the phone when my father called from the hospital, the last time he was ever able to call. The mirror became a vortex of my shame. Every time I looked, it showed me another buried memory. The time I lied to my first serious girlfriend, Clara, and broke her heart to preserve my own ego. The mirror showed her crying in the rain outside the Ohio Theater, her mascara running in black streaks down her cheeks, a sight I had only imagined but knew was true. It showed me the petty office betrayal that got me a promotion but cost a decent man, Robert, his job. In the mirror, I saw him sitting in his darkened, empty cubicle in the Columbus office tower, head in his hands, his children's photos already boxed up. These were not just images, they were accusations. The air around the mirror grew perpetually cold, and a faint smell of antiseptic and rain, smells tied to those memories, began to linger in my room. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The reflections were no longer static. They were living scenes. The figures within them would sometimes turn and look at me, their eyes pleading or full of blame. I started throwing blankets over the mirror, but I'd wake up to find them slid into a heap on the floor. I tried to move it, but it was impossibly heavy, as if bolted to the fabric of the house itself. Desperation is a corrosive acid. After a week of this torment, I was searching online for haunted object removal. At 4 a.m. when I found a listing for esoteric readings and spiritual cleansing in the German village area of Columbus. The website was simple, no flashy graphics, just an address on South 3rd Street and a phone number. The psychic, a woman named Ilara, who asked me to call her by her first name only, worked out of a small, unassuming brick house that blended perfectly with the other well-kept historic homes. Her office was a back room, sparsely furnished with a simple table, 2 chairs, and shelves lined with books and curiously shaped stones. There were no crystal balls. She was a woman in her late 50s with calm, wary eyes. I didn't have to say much. I mentioned the mirror, the things it was showing me. She listened, her fingers steepled, and then she asked a single, chilling question. Have the reflections tried to come out yet? She told me the mirror was not merely a reflector of memory. It was a prison, a gateway. She called it a lament configuration, a vessel created in a forgotten era to trap tormented souls. Not the dead, but fragments of the living, the psychic residue of profound regret and shame. These fragments, these echoes, are drawn to the mirror and bound within it. On Halloween, when the veil is thinnest, the mirror doesn't just show you your regrets. It connects you directly to the pocket dimension, where these echo spirits are held. They are desperate, she explained, desperate to feel something new, to escape their endless, looping torment. And the only way out is to switch places with the one looking in. They are not showing you your past to torment you, Ilara said, her voice low and grave. They are showing you their prison. They are making you feel their pain, so you will understand their desperation. They want you to open the door from your side. A strong emotion, terror, despair, even a moment of profound guilt, can be the key that turns the lock, especially tonight. It was Halloween again. I had been living with the mirror for a year. I felt a cold dread wash over me. I had given it all of those things in abundance. How do I break it? I asked, my voice cracking. She looked at me with profound pity. You cannot break a gateway. You can only close it. And to do that, you must face what is inside without giving in. You must reject its reality. If you fail, they will cross over. They will wear your face, live your life, and you will take their place in the endless loop. I drove home in a blind panic. The suburban streets of Dublin were once again filled with costumed children, their cheerful shouts sounding distant and distorted, like audio from a corrupted file. My townhouse was dark and silent. As I opened my front door, I knew something was wrong. The air was frigid and carried the unmistakable scent of ozone and old books. The smell of my grandfather's attic, where I'd broken a valuable vintage model plane and hidden the pieces. Another regret the mirror had shown me. I could hear a faint, muffled sound coming from upstairs. It was the sound of someone weeping. I climbed the stairs, each step an act of will. The weeping grew louder, a ragged, hopeless sound I recognized as my own from the night my father died. My bedroom door was slightly ajar. Through the crack, I could see the mirror. It was glowing with a sickly, phosphorescent green light that pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The room reflected in it was no longer my room at all, but a grim, gray, featureless space like an abandoned warehouse. And in that space, I saw them. Dozens of them. Shades of myself in various states of despair. The grieving son, the heartless boyfriend, the backstabbing colleague. They were all there, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow. And they were all pressed against the surface of the glass from the other side, their palms flat, their mouths open in silent screams, pushing. The surface of the mirror bulged outward, like a film of soap water stretched to its limit. It was no longer solid glass, it was a membrane. As I watched, a single, translucent hand, shimmering and indistinct, began to push its way through the center of the bulging surface. The weeping sound was deafening now, coming from both the mirror and from all around me. The temperature plummeted. I remembered Elera's words. You must face what is inside without giving in. You must reject its reality. This was not my regret. This was a parasite, a ghost feeding on my past. I took a step forward, my entire body trembling. I looked at the multitude of my own tormented faces, and I said, my voice a shaky whisper that grew stronger, you are not me. This is not my home. This door is closed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a shriek of tearing fabric and breaking glass, though the mirror remained physically intact, filled the room. The pushing figures contorted in rage and agony. The bulging surface snapped back, and the green light was sucked inward into a single, infinitesimal point at the mirror's center, before vanishing completely. The silence that followed was absolute and heavy. The mirror was just a mirror again. It reflected my pale, terrified face and my normal, messy bedroom. The cold was gone. The smells were gone. I stood there for a long time, waiting. Nothing happened. I called a professional moving company the next day. 2 burly men in uniforms grunted and strained, but they managed to carry the mirror out of my townhouse and into their truck. I told them to take it to the landfill. I never asked which one. I moved out of that townhouse a month later. I now live in a modern high-rise apartment in downtown Columbus with floor-to-ceiling windows that show only the city lights and the sky. I own no mirrors. I shave by touch and the vague reflection in my microwave door. I am free of the manifestations, but not of the knowledge. I know what doors exist in the world, hidden in plain sight. And I know that on the other side of the glass, in the silent, gray spaces, something is always waiting, watching for a moment of weakness, desperate to make you remember what you so desperately want to forget. The gateway is closed, but the memory of it is a prison of its own. The argument started over nothing, as they often do, but on that particular Halloween night, it festered in the closed space of our car until it became a living, breathing thing. We were somewhere deep in the Pisgah National Forest. The GPS on my phone had lost signal over an hour ago, and the printed directions I'd foolishly relied on were now proven tragically wrong. "I told you we should have taken the interstate," Chloe said, her voice tight, staring out her window at the unending blackness. "But no, you had to take the scenic route to a Halloween party." I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The scenic route was supposed to save us 40 minutes. How was I supposed to know this road? Looks like it hasn't been maintained since the Carter administration. The headlights cut too weak. Swaying cones of light through the absolute darkness, illuminating nothing but more twisting road and the skeletal forms of trees. The desolation was complete. We hadn't seen another car, another light, another sign of human existence for what felt like an eternity. "Just stop, Mark. Just pull over." She finally snapped, the words like gunshots in the quiet car. I swerved onto the gravel shoulder, the tires crunching loudly in the silence. "I can't do this right now. I need air." She shoved her door open and stepped out into the cold mountain air, slamming it shut with a force that made the entire car shudder. I saw her silhouette stride past the headlights and into the tree line, swallowed by the shadows in an instant. My pride kept me in the driver's seat for 5 minutes, then 10. The cold began to seep into the car. I rolled down my window. "Chloe." My voice was swallowed by the forest, producing no echo. "Chloe, come on. This isn't funny." Nothing. Only the sound of the wind moving through the high pine boughs. A sound like a distant, mournful sea. A knot of genuine fear tightened in my stomach. I got out, the cold air biting through my jacket. I called her name again, louder this time, my breath pluming in the air. The silence that answered was absolute and predatory. I grabbed my phone from the center console. No service. The screen's glow was a pathetic talisman against the crushing dark. I used its light to scan the edge of the woods where she disappeared. There were no paths, just a steep, leaf-littered incline choked with rhododendron bushes. I started up it, my shoes slipping on the wet leaves. "Chloe, please answer me!" Panic was now a live wire in my veins. I pushed deeper, the branches clawing at my clothes, the beam of my phone light bouncing erratically, creating monstrous, moving shadows. I don't know how long I stumbled through that absolute blackness. But eventually, I broke through a final line of brush and found myself on another road, or what passed for one. It was a single lane of cracked and heaved asphalt, even more decrepit than the one we'd left. And there, in the mud on the opposite shoulder, was a single, clear footprint, a woman's running shoe. Chloe's size, a surge of relief, immediately followed by a fresh wave of dread. She was out here, somewhere in this. I followed the road, my jog turning into a run, my calls for her becoming more desperate and hoarse. The road curved, and as I rounded the bend, I saw it. A chain-link fence, at least 12 feet high, topped with coiled razor wire. It stretched away into the darkness in both directions. Set into it was an open gate, a heavy, industrial thing that was hanging askew on one broken hinge. Beyond it, the outlines of several large, windowless corrugated metal buildings were just visible under the faint light of a half-obscured moon. No lights were on, no sounds came from within. This was wrong, deep in your bones wrong. This wasn't a logging operation or a forgotten farm. The scale, the razor wire, the profound silence. It screamed of a place that did not want visitors. But that's when I saw it. Caught on a jagged piece of the broken gate, a small, torn piece of purple fabric. The exact color of the sweater Chloe had been wearing. She had come this way. She had gone in there. I slipped through the gap in the gate, my heart hammering against my ribs. The compound was a maze of shadows. I moved from the corner of one building to the next, my back pressed against the cold, ridged metal. I was about to call out in a whisper when I heard it, the distinct crunch of a footstep on gravel, not my own. I froze, melting into the shadow of a large, industrial dumpster. Two figures emerged from between two buildings. They weren't wearing Halloween costumes. They were dressed in dark, practical work clothes, and one of them carried a long, heavy flashlight, its beam cutting a swath through the dark. The other had a holstered pistol on his hip. They walked with a casual, proprietary air, a patrol. Heard the perimeter sensor go off twice, one of them said, his voice a low, carrying grumble. Probably just deer. The other man snorted. On a night when everyone's dressed like monsters. Perfect cover. Makes people ignore the real ones. Let's just do a sweep. Boss wants the shipment ready to move by 3 a.m. They passed within 20 feet of my hiding spot, and I stopped breathing. Once their footsteps faded, I moved in the opposite direction, towards the largest building. A faint sliver of light bled from under a side door. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open just enough to slide inside, into near total darkness filled with the smells of oil, dust, and something else, something coppery and fall. My eyes adjusted slowly. The space was vast, a warehouse. Stacked crates formed canyon walls. And then I saw her. Across the open floor, hiding behind a stack of wooden pallets, was Chloe. Her face was pale and streaked with dirt, her eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. She saw me at the same moment, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a sob. We were separated by 50 yards of open, deadly space. I began to move, sticking to the shadows along the wall, my eyes locked on hers. Every scuff of my shoe on the concrete sounded like a thunderclap. I was halfway to her when headlights flashed outside, sweeping through the grimy windows high on the walls. The main roll-up door of the warehouse began to screech and rumble as it lifted. Chloe's eyes went wider. I broke into a low, desperate run, closing the last of the distance as engines growled and men's voices called out to one another. We collapsed together behind the pallets, a fragile sanctuary in a world gone mad. I held her, feeling her tremble uncontrollably. They're loading trucks," she whispered directly into my ear, her voice cracking. I saw them. There are weapons. And I saw a body mark. In a tarp. They just dragged it out back. The reality of our situation crashed down on me. We weren't just in a place we weren't supposed to be. We were witnesses. Our only value was our silence, and these men had very direct ways of ensuring it. Our Halloween argument, the wrong turn, it had all led us here, to this moment where our lives had a rapidly expiring clock. We had to move. Now, while they were distracted with their loading, there was a regular-sized door on the far wall, past the trucks. It was our only chance. I pointed, and Chloe nodded, her jaw set with a grim resolve I'd never seen in her before. We waited for a moment, when the three men were all heaving a crate into the back of a truck, their backs turned. Now, I breathed. We broke from cover, running low and fast, our footsteps masked by the general industrial din. My hand closed on the cold metal of the door handle. I prayed it wasn't locked. I pushed. It gave with a quiet click. We spilled out into the shocking, cold freedom of the night, back into the woods at the rear of the compound. We didn't stop running. We crashed through the undergrowth, no longer caring about the noise, driven only by the primal need for distance. Thorns ripped at our skin, branches lashed our faces. Behind us, an alarm began to blare, a raw, electronic shriek that tore through the silent forest. Shouts followed, and then the piercing beams of high-powered flashlights began to sweep the trees around us. They were hunting. We were the prey. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs gave way, collapsing into a shallow creek bed, the icy water soaking through our clothes. We lay there, panting, listening as the sounds of our pursuers eventually faded into the distance, swallowed by the vast, uncaring darkness of the Pisgah National Forest on Halloween night. The nightmare wasn't over, but for now, we were together, and we were alive.